In this presentation, we will discuss our first option for creating invoices and tracking accounts receivable when we're using more of a cash basis system, when we're entering the data into our accounting system from the bank statement within QuickBooks Online. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. So this is a common scenario where we might have a client or we might ourselves say, hey, you know what, I'd like to use QuickBooks in order to create the invoices. In other words, we have a situation where we do the work before we bill the client, and then we want to bill the client an invoice, make an invoice, and send it to the client. Now, once that comes up in our own head, or if that comes up from a client under the system we're proposing here, a cash basis system, we have to say, whoa, wait a second. If we enter the invoice into our QuickBooks system, using the method we have here, it's going to throw things out of whack a little bit. So we have to consider what exactly do we want with the invoice, because if we make the invoice and we want it just to make an invoice, just to have something that we can write a bill on to mail the client, then we may not want to use QuickBooks, but may want to use something like Word or Excel, because those will allow us to format an invoice without having the added problem of it creating a transaction within QuickBooks. So in other words, if we're okay to use a cash basis system, which is to not record the revenue until it clears the bank, as we're proposing here, but still have the ability to create an invoice, just a bill that we can then mail, and in so doing not track the receivable in QuickBooks, but just simply track it outside of QuickBooks, then we can stick with our system here. That might be the first option we would provide. Now, of course, if they say, no, I'd like to track it within QuickBooks, then we have to think about our whole cash basis system and how we can maybe compensate for deviating from that one component to account for the accounts receivable tracking in some way, or at least help out with that in some way. But in this case, we're going to say, okay, we're going to be okay to track it outside of QuickBooks, the receivables, who owes us money. We'll just track that in Excel. And we want to use something to create invoices. So we're going to say, okay, let's try to make an invoice that's nice outside of QuickBooks so that we can just make an invoice that we can use to bill. And of course, that would be something like a Word document. So Word would be something we can use. We can use Google Docs as well. But Word has some templates that we can use. So if you were to think about invoices and say, well, the first place you can start if we just want to make an invoice that we can then send to a client, we can then go to the File tab over here, and if we say New on this side and type in the type of document, notice we have all these different kind of templates that will typically come with Word. If we type in Invoice, then we'll get a lot of different invoice type of options that we can have. We have all these different options for invoices, so a lot of different things that we can do with the invoices. And so we can go through these options, and some of them will be specific to an industry, and some of them will just have a nice look to them or whatever we want for it. So if we just select one of those invoices, then we can take a look at it and then make a template of the invoice. So we can say, all right, if this is the invoice that we want, we can then customize this invoice, make it our template, and then we can just use this invoice to bill people, meaning we're just going to type in down here that we want the item, the description, and the quantity, and then the amount basically will type in here and give us the actual invoice. We can typically put in logos and whatnot and customize the invoices from here. Most of these invoices are fairly complex in their creation, meaning the type of form that's being used. So you want to be careful of like deleting the whole text box or something like that, because they're going to be using text boxes. So you're going to have to choose which invoice would be best, and it's got to look pretty much like you want it to be, because you don't want to go in and start deleting text boxes or anything like that too much. But once you find an invoice that's good, then we can just take that invoice and enter the data. Now, of course, as we enter the data, it's not going to add up anything for us. It's a Word document. So all it's going to do, we'll have the item and the description. And when we have the quantity, the bill, we're going to have to, of course, add up the bill and add up any kind of sales tax or anything that would be required there, and just simply type it in. Also, when we send this out, then we're going to have to track it, because we're not tracking it in QuickBooks because we're on a cash basis within QuickBooks. We're not tracking the accounts receivable because on our side, on the bookkeeping side, on the receiving side, We're just seeing the payments that we got received here. And they could be including multiple invoices. We don't have the name of the recipient unless it's like an electronic transfer type of thing. But typically we don't have the name. So all we would have is the amount to match it up to the invoice that was sent out. So we can't really match it up too easily unless there's very few type of deposits. And so we don't really want to get into that system of trying to match it up. We're just going to say these are just going to be customers. We're not going to really tie it out to the invoice specifically. And therefore, to track the payment, to make sure we're getting paid, it's going to have to tracked somewhere else, either by paper and pencil. If you don't have that many outstanding invoices, that's not too difficult to do, or something like an Excel worksheet, which of course might look something like this, and we can create a template. And we can have the invoice number that was sent out, the date, the amount, and then if they received payment, any received payment on it, and then a balance. So if we just have a few invoices that are sent out that are outstanding, and say the rest of our business is we get the money at the same time possibly, or we just have a few invoices and that's they're hopefully a higher dollar amount invoices and that's all we have, then tracking just in Excel would be fine. It's probably easier than tracking in QuickBooks because QuickBooks, of course, makes us match. We have to use that matching method. So under this method, we can track the what's outstanding in terms of the invoice outside of QuickBooks. We can create an invoice and send it, and then we can still be on a cash basis method and enter the data into QuickBooks, not when the invoice goes out, as would be done if we created the invoice in QuickBooks, but when we get the deposit, just as we would under the normal system. Also, we don't have like two people. If the client wanted to enter an invoice into the system, then they would be kind of making transactions in the system, and then we would be making transactions, and that could muddy things up. We want to be able to say, hey, these are your books. You get to keep them. They're yours. You can print reports and whatnot. And if you need to go somewhere else, you can take them. That's totally your books. But we don't want to really have two people making transactions because, of course, that'll confuse things. So that's it. And we can also make templates within QuickBooks, right? We could make a template, in Excel, same method. We can go to the File tab, and we can go to the New, and then if you type in Invoice, you have a lot of options for creating invoices in Excel as well. And they might give you, of course, some actual calculation options within Excel. So those are two ways that if all that is needed is for us to create an invoice, then you can look at templates within Word, templates within Excel, and see if we can customize those to the needs of just sending out an invoice, just sending out a bill, and then tracking that information within Excel or some other format, and then not deviate at all from the cash basis when it comes to our QuickBooks books. On the QuickBooks books, then, we're not going to have anything for accounts receivable. We're not going to track accounts receivable. Accounts receivable is an accrual account, and the books, then, will remain on a cash basis and therefore not have accrual accounts. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.